The name Bellatrix Lestrange would send shivers down the spines of even the bravest of witches and wizards, and this reputation was well deserved, as her terrifying perspectives and bloodthirsty nature propelled her to commit numerous unthinkable acts over the 46 years that she terrorized the greater wizarding community. Widely considered to be one of the most powerful and dangerous witches of her time, Bellatrix is perhaps best known as Voldemort's right-hand woman, occupying a high-up role in the Death Eater hierarchy. But beyond all of this, there was actually a lot more to Bellatrix than some realize. Today we're going to be diving into her history, peeling back the layers of her character, and uncovering what may have motivated her to become the woman that she did. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Childhood. The first thing you should know is that Bellatrix Lestrange was not always a Lestrange, and was actually born Bellatrix Black in 1951 to the prestigious pure-blood family, the Blacks, a family featured on the Sacred 28, known for their strong beliefs in blood purity and their disdain for Muggles and Muggleborns. But before we continue, I just want to mention that only 30% of you are subscribed. So if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to support the channel. Growing up in a household steeped in tradition, Bellatrix was surrounded by the ideals of superiority that her family championed, and her early life was strongly shaped by her parents, Cygnus and Torella Black, who instilled in her a sense of entitlement and a fierce loyalty to their pure-blood beliefs. Growing up alongside her were her two younger sisters, Andromeda and Narcissa, who would later become known as Andromeda Tonks and Narcissa Malfoy. And interestingly, all of the sisters seem to have taken very different paths in life, especially regarding their views on blood purity and alliances. From a very young age, Bellatrix exhibited a rebellious streak, and while her sister Andromeda took a path that deviated from the family's expectations, Bellatrix fully embraced her family's ideology, leaning into an existence fueled by hatred and bigotry. Hogwarts. At the age of 11, in the year 1962, Bellatrix Black received a Hogwarts letter and set off for school that September. Long before Bellatrix ever set foot in Hogwarts, it was evident that she was destined for Slytherin House, and when the time came for her to begin her magical education, the Sorting Hat confirmed this destiny, sorting her into Slytherin almost instantly. After being sorted into Slytherin, Bellatrix thrived in an environment that celebrated her ambition, cunning, and thirst for power. She also quickly formed friendships with other pure-blood witches and wizards, many of whom would later become Death Eaters. But perhaps the most significant person she met was Rodolphus Lestrange, a pure-blood wizard from the esteemed Lestrange family. From a young age, Bellatrix and her sisters were educated on the significance of pure-blood marriage customs, which emphasized the importance of marrying to maintain their family's lineage. And so, upon finishing her 7th and final year at Hogwarts, Bellatrix wed Rodolphus, taking on the name that she would later become feared as, Bellatrix Lestrange. Post-Hogwarts. Despite marrying Rodolphus, Bellatrix had no real affection for him, nor did she display any interest in him. She rarely mentioned him in conversations, and showed little to no warmth or connection. Their marriage was less of a bond of love, and more a fulfillment of duty, dictated by the pure-blood traditions that had shaped her upbringing. Moreover, Bellatrix never bore any children with Rodolphus, further emphasizing the absence of a deep personal relationship between them. And what we don't find out until later is that Bellatrix's lack of feelings toward Rodolphus was largely due to her love for another man. After becoming a Death Eater and receiving the Dark Mark alongside Rodolphus and her brother-in-law Rabastan, she became deeply infatuated with Lord Voldemort. J.K. Rowling later elaborated on this, indicating that Bellatrix was not merely enamored, she was intensely and obsessively in love with Voldemort, with her feelings strongly rooted in sexual attraction. Bellatrix's dedication to the cause of pure-blood supremacy and her unwavering allegiance to Lord Voldemort eventually earned her a prominent place among his most trusted followers. Known for her fierce temperament and ruthless nature, Bellatrix rose through the ranks of the Death Eaters, becoming one of the Dark Lord's most valued and feared servants. At some point, she even received direct training in the dark arts from Voldemort himself. Torture of the Longbottoms and Azkaban. On Halloween in 1981, after the Dark Lord fell at the hands of Harry Potter, Bellatrix, along with her husband Rodolphus, her brother-in-law Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., evaded capture during the Ministry's swift roundup of Death Eaters. Determined to revive Voldemort, they kidnapped Aurors Alice and Frank Longbottom, who had just become parents to Neville, believing they might hold vital information about their master. The group subjected the couple to hours of relentless torture using the Cruciatus Curse, causing irreparable psychological damage that left them mentally broken, unable to recognize even their own son. This heinous act sparked outrage within the wizarding community, putting immense pressure on the Ministry to apprehend the culprits. Eventually, the four were captured and faced trial before the Council of Magical Law. As they were escorted in by Dementors and chained to their seats, Bellatrix exuded an unsettling confidence, sitting as if her chair were a throne. They were unanimously sentenced to life in Azkaban, with Bellatrix defiantly proclaiming, "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban. We will wait. He will rise again and will come for us. He will reward us beyond any of his other supporters. We alone were faithful. We alone tried to find him." Marked as Prisoner 93, Bellatrix was condemned to a lifetime in Azkaban with no hope of release, steadfast in her belief that the love of her life would return. And 15 years later, he did. But in the meantime, Bellatrix deteriorated. Isolated in the depths of Azkaban, surrounded by the soul-sucking presence of Dementors, her already fractured mind unraveled further. Her once striking beauty faded, her skin grew sallow, her hair became matted, and her eyes lost their spark, replaced by a wild, haunted gaze. Yet, even in madness, her loyalty never wavered. Voldemort's return. In the year 1995, after creating a new body for himself, Voldemort summoned his remaining followers using the Dark Mark. Though Bellatrix couldn't appear before him in the graveyard due to her imprisonment, he acknowledged her, along with Rodolphus and Rabastan, declaring that the Lestranges were loyal members of his inner circle who deserved rewards for their unwavering fidelity even after their capture and trial. True to his word, it took Voldemort less than a year to orchestrate a mass breakout from Azkaban, where Bellatrix, Rodolphus, Rabastan, and 7 other Death Eaters fled the island prison. However, because they were now wanted witches and wizards, the group were forced to live in hiding to avoid capture by the Ministry. The Daily Prophet speculated that the escape was orchestrated by Sirius Black, but those who broke free were considered some of the most dangerous convicts due to their brutal crimes. Consequently, Bellatrix and her allies became wanted witches and wizards, forced to live in hiding to avoid capture by the Ministry. That is, until the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. The Battle of the Department of Mysteries was one of the most important in this series, as it catapulted tensions between the Death Eaters and the Order of the Phoenix. It also served as one of the catalysts for the Second Wizarding War, and was the time when the lurking followers of Lord Voldemort re-emerged for the first time. The mission was led by Lucius Malfoy, and Bellatrix, her husband Rodolphus, and brother-in-law Rabastan were all part of a Death Eater task force who had the goal of retrieving the prophecy that pertained to the Dark Lord and Harry Potter. But they weren't alone, as Harry, along with 5 Dumbledore's army members, travelled to the same department, eventually finding themselves in the Hall of Prophecies. After noticing an orb with his and the Dark Lord's names inscribed on it, Harry reached out and picked it up, prompting 12 Death Eaters to emerge from the shadows. In this moment, Lucius stepped forward, demanding that Harry hand over the prophecy. When they cornered Harry and his friends, Bellatrix became enraged when Harry spoke Voldemort's real name and mentioned his status as a half-blood. Furious, Bellatrix tried to stun Harry, but Lucius deflected her spell with the shield charm as to avoid any harm to the prophecy they were there to retrieve. Seizing the moment, Harry distracted the Death Eaters, allowing the kids to scatter. Lucius directed Bellatrix and Rodolphus left, while the others went right. They soon found Harry, who was holding the prophecy aloft as he fled. Not wanting to risk damaging it, Bellatrix pursued him into the room with the archway. Just as the Death Eaters were closing in on the prophecy, members of the Order of the Phoenix arrived, including Bellatrix's cousin Sirius and niece Nymphadora Tonks. A fierce battle erupted, and Bellatrix swiftly engaged Tonks, quickly overpowering her. She then turned her wrath on Sirius, ultimately sending him through the veil, killing her own cousin. Even Kingsley Shacklebolt, who took over Sirius's duel, couldn't match Bellatrix's skill. But it wasn't long before she bolted toward the Ministry atrium. Fueled by rage over his godfather's death, Harry chased Bellatrix into the atrium, intent on avenging Sirius. As he pursued her, Bellatrix relentlessly taunted him about his relationship with Sirius. In response to this, Harry tried to use the Cruciatus curse on her, but it merely knocked her down, causing her just a few seconds of actual pain. Bellatrix then taunted Harry and vowed to show him the true power of the curse. Never used an unforgivable curse before, have you, boy? You need to mean them, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain, to enjoy it. Righteous anger won't hurt me for long. I'll show you how it's done, shall I? I'll give you a lesson. Crucio. However, Bellatrix was equally as unsuccessful, and after failing to attack Harry, Bellatrix was horrified to realize the prophecy had been destroyed. In a panic, she repeatedly attempted to summon it from him, only to be met with Harry's laughter, unaware that Voldemort had just arrived at the Ministry. In a panic, Bellatrix begged Voldemort not to punish her and tried to warn him about Dumbledore's presence. However, Voldemort ignored her and instead chose to focus on killing Harry. Just as the killing curse shot from his wand toward Harry, Dumbledore arrived and enchanted the statues of the Fountain of Magical Brethren. They sprang to life to protect Harry, provide reinforcements, and pin Bellatrix to the ground with the enchanted witch statue, preventing her from intervening. What followed was perhaps one of the greatest duels in the entire Harry Potter series. Before confronting Voldemort, Dumbledore summoned Cornelius Fudge and several Aurors to the Ministry, and after an unsuccessful duel with Dumbledore and a failed attempt to possess Harry, Voldemort grabbed Bellatrix and apparated away. In the aftermath, all of the other Death Eaters were swiftly immobilized and apprehended, with only Bellatrix and Voldemort escaping. This escape only deepened her delusion of loyalty, convincing her that Voldemort truly valued her above the others. Following the Death Eaters' failed mission at the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort punished Lucius Malfoy for his failure to retrieve the prophecy and ended up giving Bellatrix's nephew, Draco Malfoy, the impossible task of killing Albus Dumbledore. This put Narcissa, Bellatrix's sister, into a state of desperation, and so she reluctantly agreed to accompany her to Snape's house, Spinner's End, and Draco's mission. Because Bellatrix was Voldemort's most loyal Death Eater, and because she harbored feelings for him, she was particularly protective of him and his cause. This meant that Snape's wishy-washy history left Bellatrix unconvinced of Snape's motivations. Upon their arrival at Spinner's End, Bellatrix aggressively interrogated Snape, openly expressing her distrust. However, despite her hostile approach, Snape remained calm and provided logical responses, leaving her momentarily speechless. Narcissa then pleaded with Snape to ensure her son Draco's safety as he attempted to carry out Voldemort's order to kill Dumbledore. Following this, Narcissa and Bellatrix proposed the idea of an unbreakable vow, with Bellatrix doubting that Snape would willingly agree to it. However, to her surprise, Snape accepted the vow, ultimately disproving Bellatrix's allegations. The conditions of the vow required Snape to protect Draco from harm while he attempted the task set by Voldemort, with Snape committing to completing the task himself if Draco was unable to do so. Death Eater Meeting. By the following year, Bellatrix was living with Narcissa at Malfoy Manor, the only resident pleased by Voldemort's presence, and during the Death Eater meeting claimed that there was no higher pleasure than to have him stay in their home. Voldemort thanked her, saying her words meant a great deal to him, and in response, Bellatrix's face lit up with joy. However, this moment of happiness was short-lived, as moments later, Voldemort cruelly mocked her about her niece Nymphadora's marriage to known werewolf Remus Lupin, sarcastically suggesting she must be proud. The room erupted in laughter, and Bellatrix's earlier joy turned to humiliation as she defended her disavowal of Nymphadora. She then stated that she had not spoken to her sister Andromeda since her marriage to the Muggle-born Ted Tonks. Voldemort then suggested that everyone should prune their pureblood families to maintain their purity. Bellatrix vowed to rid the world of her blood traitor sister, her half-blood niece, and her Muggle-born brother-in-law. Battle of the Seven Potters. Following the meeting, the Death Eaters attacked the Order of the Phoenix while moving Harry Potter from No. 4 Privet Drive in what would become known as the Battle of the Seven Potters. Bellatrix and Rodolphus ended up pursuing a disguised Ron Weasley paired with Tonks, and Bellatrix, who was determined to kill her, claimed later that her focus was more on Tonks than on Harry. Eager to please Voldemort and follow his directive to prune her family tree, she fought fiercely but ultimately failed in her mission, and her husband was injured in the process, something she seemed to barely acknowledge. Malfoy Manor. In March of 1998, the Malfoy Manor became the setting for one of the most intense confrontations of the Second Wizarding War. At the time, Bellatrix was residing there along with her sister Narcissa, brother-in-law Lucius, and their son Draco. That year, under the command of Severus Snape, now headmaster of Hogwarts, Bellatrix had secretly hidden what she believed to be the Sword of Gryffindor in her family's vault at Gringotts, alongside one of Voldemort's most closely guarded Horcruxes, Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Unbeknownst to Bellatrix, however, the sword placed in her vault was a fake. The goblins at the bank recognized it as a fake, but chose not to inform Bellatrix due to their disdain for the new wizard control over the bank. The tension came to a head when a group of snatchers arrived at Malfoy Manor, claiming to have captured Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley. Narcissa brought the captives inside and asked Draco to identify them, but when it came time to give his opinion, he hesitated. But when Bellatrix entered and laid eyes on the trio, and more importantly, spotted the Sword of Gryffindor in the Snatcher's possession, her mood shifted drastically. She was moments from summoning Voldemort using the dark mark on her arm when Lucius intervened, insisting he should be the one to call their master. Bellatrix scoffed at him, cruelly reminding him that he had lost that privilege when Voldemort confiscated his wand earlier that year. But the appearance of the sword caused Bellatrix to descend into panic. If the sword was here, real and tangible, then the one she'd hidden in her vault must have been stolen. And if someone had broken into her vault, they could have taken something far more important, the Horcrux. Her fear of Voldemort's wrath overtook her, and she immediately lashed out. When the snatcher holding the sword refused to hand it over, she stunned him without hesitation. The other snatchers quickly turned on her, but even 4 against 1, they were no match for her ferocity. She subdued them all, sparing only Fenrir Greyback, who was left kneeling at her feet. Bellatrix demanded to know where the sword had come from, and Greyback confessed that it had been found in the trio's tent. The trio was then separated, and Bellatrix dragged Hermione aside and sent the others to the cellar. With ruthless determination, she began torturing Hermione with both the Cruciatus Curse and a knife, repeatedly demanding to know where the sword had come from and whether anything else had been taken from her vault. Despite the agony, Hermione managed to lie, claiming the sword was merely a copy. Still unconvinced, Lucius suggested that Draco retrieve Griphook from the cellar, but when he came upstairs, Griphook, following Harry's plea, also lied and told her the sword was a fake. This momentarily lifted the weight from Bellatrix's shoulders. However, after Peter Pettigrew went to investigate a strange noise coming from the cellar, he was killed when his own silver hand, gifted to him by Voldemort, turned on him as punishment for hesitating to harm Harry and Ron. With Pettigrew dead, Harry and Ron seized the opportunity to escape and rushed upstairs to help Hermione. A brief but chaotic duel then broke out, and Bellatrix, desperate to take control of the situation, grabbed Hermione and pressed a knife to her throat. She then demanded that the prisoners drop their wands and finally summoned Voldemort. The situation turned once again, however, when Dobby, sent by Aberforth Dumbledore to rescue the trio, caused a chandelier to crash down onto Bellatrix, prompting her to release Hermione and dive out of the way. Furious at the elf's defiance, Bellatrix hurled her silver dagger at Dobby just as he disapparated with Harry, and unfortunately for all of us Harry Potter fans, the blade got caught in the magic and struck Dobby fatally in the chest, causing him to die moments later. Free, but gone. At some point amidst the skirmish, Bellatrix also lost her wand. After the dust had settled and the trio had disapparated, Voldemort soon arrived at the manor, only to learn that Harry Potter had once again escaped. Enraged beyond measure, he punished Bellatrix and the Malfoys severely for their failure. Battle of Hogwarts. As the Second Wizarding War neared its end, Bellatrix Lestrange remained one of Voldemort's most loyal and dangerous followers. Even after numerous failures, she never wavered in her devotion. Her loyalty, however, would ultimately cost her everything. After the events at Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix's panic revealed to Harry that something else of great value must be hidden in her Gringotts vault. And that assumption proved correct, as Voldemort had entrusted her with the keeping of one of his Horcruxes, Helga Hufflepuff's cup. To infiltrate the vault, Hermione used one of Bellatrix's hairs taken from Malfoy Manor to produce Polyjuice Potion and impersonate Bellatrix. And the plan worked, as the trio were able to steal the Horcrux and escape the bank with the help of a dragon. Bellatrix was present when Voldemort learned of the break-in, and realizing what it meant, she shoved others aside and fled the room in terror, seconds before Voldemort killed everyone else in his fury. Soon after this, the Battle of Hogwarts and the Death Eater's siege of the school began. Bellatrix fought with unrelenting ferocity, relishing the opportunity to continue Voldemort's work, and during the chaos, finally succeeded in fulfilling one of her darkest wishes, murdering her niece, Nymphadora Tonks. As the battle raged, Voldemort called for a temporary ceasefire, demanding Harry Potter surrender himself, and at this stage, Bellatrix withdrew with the rest of the Death Eaters to the Forbidden Forest. Covered in blood and visibly disheveled, she looked every bit the war-hardened warrior she had become. When Voldemort used the killing curse on Harry, he was briefly thrown to the ground, and Bellatrix immediately rushed to his aid, but he coldly rejected her help. She then asked to check Harry's bodies for signs of life, but Voldemort once again denied her. Instead, he ordered her sister Narcissa to do it, an act that must have stung Bellatrix deeply. Narcissa, however, used the moment to betray Voldemort, secretly discovering that Harry was still alive and lying to protect her son. As the Death Eaters followed Voldemort back to the castle to announce Harry's death, Bellatrix basked in the despair of Hogwarts defenders. She laughed mockingly when Professor McGonagall screamed upon seeing Harry's body, and cackled again when Neville Longbottom stepped forward. She also reminded Voldemort that Neville was the son of the Aurors she had driven to madness, a major point of pride for her. But when Harry proved to be very much alive, the battle resumed, and Bellatrix proved herself as one of Voldemort's deadliest followers. While Voldemort battled Kingsley Shacklebolt, Professor McGonagall, and Horace Slughorn, Bellatrix took on Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood. Alone. Despite being outnumbered, she held her own against the three skilled young witches. At one point, she nearly struck Ginny with a killing curse, missing by mere inches. However, this moment became her undoing. Molly Weasley, already devastated by the loss of her son Fred, saw the curse narrowly miss her only daughter, which prompted her to storm into the fight and challenge Bellatrix. Bellatrix laughed initially, amused by what she assumed was an outmatched opponent, but that laughter didn't last long. Bellatrix, ever arrogant, tried to taunt Molly with threats, jeering, "What will happen to your children when I've killed you? When Mummy's gone, the same way as Freddy." But rather than distract Molly, it only fueled her rage. And with one final, perfectly aimed curse, Molly struck Bellatrix squarely in the chest, directly over her heart. Bellatrix's gloating expression froze, her eyes bulged for a fraction of a second, and then she collapsed, lifeless. Bellatrix died as she had lived, cruel, delusional, and obsessed with Voldemort. Her belief that he cared for her was a tragic fantasy, but it was that belief that fueled her brutal devotion. In the end, she gave everything to the Dark Lord, and died without ever seeing him fall just moments later. Legacy and daughter. While many Harry Potter fans believe Bellatrix's story ended with her death at the Battle of Hogwarts, the truth is, her legacy continued long after she was gone. And why is that, you might ask? Well, because she had a daughter. This part of her story will depend entirely on whether or not you subscribe to the events of the Cursed Child, and for many, this will be a no-go. But just for a moment, let's entertain the version of canon introduced by the Cursed Child, and the idea that Voldemort conceived a child with his right-hand woman and resident Wizarding World lunatic, Bellatrix Lestrange. We don't have exact dates for when their daughter was conceived or when she was ultimately born into the world. However, given that the Battle of Hogwarts took place on May 2nd, 1998, it's likely that she was conceived no later than late summer or early autumn of 1997, to allow for a full-term pregnancy before Bellatrix died in May 1998. Her birth was kept a secret by her parents because they feared that their infamous reputations would place her in danger, especially in the event of their deaths. This timeline is supported by Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, where Delphine is described as being born before the Battle of Hogwarts and raised secretly by Euphemia Rowell after Bellatrix's death. And while it's never explicitly confirmed anywhere, it's highly likely that their daughter, who would come to be known as Delphi or Delphine, was both conceived and born at Malfoy Manor. And the rationale here is fairly clear. Bellatrix was living at Malfoy Manor during the height of the Second Wizarding War, particularly throughout the events of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Voldemort also used the manor as his primary base of operations during this period, often returning there to hold Death Eater meetings, most notably the one in which he murders Charity Burbage. Bellatrix's unwavering devotion to Voldemort, combined with her constant presence at the manor, aligns with the timeline in which Delphine is believed to have been conceived. And so, after Voldemort's fall in 1998, it wasn't just the Dark Lord who left behind a legacy. It was Bellatrix as well. Through her daughter Delphine, the only known living heir of Salazar Slytherin, Bellatrix's twisted devotion lived on, a final act of loyalty to Voldemort that reached beyond the grave. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this Life of style video. Let me know which character you want me to cover next. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and to forget to live